Welcome to the 1% Better Everyday podcast. I'm your producer, RJ Malik, and our guest today is Anthony Bueti, Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President of Lincoln Investment Planning. Lincoln was founded in 1968, serves approximately 355,000 investors across 39 states, and has built its reputation on helping K-12 educators plan for retirement. Chip, why don't you take it away and get this thing rolling?
RJ, thanks so much. Anthony, great to have you on the show. It's been too long.
Thanks for having me. Yep. Excited to be here. Thanks.
We haven't caught up in way too long, and I am so excited to have you on the show. We have a lot to talk about. I know you've been super busy over the last, basically 3 to 4 years. And congratulations on a new promotion.
Thank you. No, I'm super excited for the new role, stepping into the COO role. There's been a lot of work done and over the last couple of years, and it really was all positioning us to get to this point in time and the work that we're going to do from now forward.
Well, it's interesting because obviously I have a lot of backdrop on a lot of that work you've been doing, but I'm super interested in kind of your perspective. One of the things that I've always been amazed at is the culture that you've had at Lincoln. As we look at the marketplace and we look at what's happening out with RIAs and broker dealers, how do you protect what makes Lincoln so special while also being able to evolve the firm to meet the expanding needs of your advisors?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I don't see how we change or transform or our evolution as something that is competing to our culture. In fact, they are things that actually support each other or connected. We change and we transform so that we can maintain our culture here at Lincoln, and so really, it's not the risk of change itself, it's the risk of changing too much or in a way that we could completely lose our identity. So, Lincoln's always been a relationship-driven, advisor-centric culture. The firm was founded on a relationship. Nick Forrest founded the firm 57 years ago based on a relationship with the Philadelphia School District, a relationship that continues to exist today. Our advisors are kind of at the core of everything that we do. We understand that they value their independence. They value the flexibility that they have as independent advisors. They like to be known as individuals and not just a number, right? There are not many firms where an advisor can pick up the phone and call the CEO and provide people. Now, it's a double-edged sword sometimes, but it's part of the culture here. And so, what we can change to continue to support that culture and support the advisors. What we can't change is the way that we view advisors and view them as, just distribution, right? They're our partners, and we try to treat them as such, and we hope that they look at us in the same way.
You have such an interesting niche that you guys serve in that K-12 educators and retirement plan participant area. Given my parents were teachers, I think this is an unbelievably important work that you guys are doing. How do you see that particular, how are you expanding, helping those educators be better prepared for their future in retirement?
It's an interesting challenge, and the way we support that business is a little bit different than how we support the advisors that service clients kind of on the other end of the spectrum, kind of the mass affluent up to the high net worth. And so, we always have to kind of keep both of those groups in mind when we're doing things. Over the years, that 403B marketplace or 403B product has evolved through regulations going back to 2008, up through, recently, even with the pandemic starting a couple of years ago. A lot of these advisors were able to just, they built their business by walking into a school, sitting down in the lunchroom. And as teachers came in, they had a conversation with them about how they were saving for retirement. And so as access to schools has gotten, more difficult over the years, and, we're even hearing like, their ability to use technology within the schools is hard. A lot of these schools kind of lock down access to internet and different things. So, we have to find ways to make their jobs easier. They're competing with other firms that are not broker dealers and RIAs, and so the regulations are not the same. And so, we try to find ways to make it simple for them, right? Sit down, have a 15-minute conversation, gather all the information to, start that client relationship and get moving, so that they can start to act, because that's maybe all the time they have. And so we're uniquely focused on that because it's one of our, core competencies, one of the things that we do really, really well, but also have to solve for that high net worth client. And so, and we don't want to have different experiences across the board. And that's not something that's scalable. So, we try to find ways where there are things that we think are commodities that we do, right? So like, let's try to make account opening and client onboarding as simple as possible across the board. It's the same process for advisors, and we can support it, and it's easy and not complex. And then cater, unique experiences to those advisors and clients that are appropriate for them. So, kind of on the 403B side, how we show up and how we support them with things that are unique to 403, like loans, and pension rollovers and such. And then on the high net worth side, really dipping into more complex products, planning, as a holistic service. And so really, like, we have to kind of play on both ends of the spectrum.
I respect that. And I loved how you kind of talked about a uniform experience. And, I have a little inside ball here from working with you guys, but you've really been transforming your systems and processes over the past few years. What are some of the things you've learned from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, it's been an interesting time here at Lincoln. For those who aren't aware of our story, we were a self-clearing firm for a number of years. And a few years ago, we sat down and we looked at the business overall, and we said, what do we want to be when we grow up? And was it the best self-clearing firm in the industry? And when we looked at firms our size, there weren't a lot of firms that were doing self-clearing at 1,000 advisors and at the asset levels. And so we said, we need to make a pretty significant shift. Let's outsource things that we don't think are directly, drive our value proposition at the end of the day, and really start to focus on how we service advisors. And so, first thing I would say is, transformation or change is not, it's not linear. It's iterative.
Right.
If you don't get it right, then you have to kind of pivot and change quickly. We didn't do that enough before. We're certainly doing that now. And so it's, my boss talks about fail fast, right? First attempt in learning. If something's not working right, it's okay to say, hey, let's pause for a minute, pivot, and let's keep moving. But the ultimate goal is continuous change, continuous improvement, and trying to drive value. The other thing I think that really came to the surface over the last couple of years is moving off of self-clearing over to a fully disclosed platform, moving, hundreds of thousands of accounts and data. And honestly, that was the easy part of all of this, right? The technology change was easy. Managing change and managing the people was the hard part. And so, we learned we had to spend as much time on defining process and, data mapping and like all the things to do the technology side of this transformation. We probably spent twice the amount of time on how do we get advisors to engage and buy in? How do we get them to learn how to do business the new way? How do we get our internal teams to understand the vision and the why? And so, like, the change management aspect of it was a huge part of this overall initiative. And then the last thing I'll say is process has to be core to everything you do, right? if your process isn't good, and this is the ops guy speaking. If your process isn't good, moving a bad process from one platform to the other is, you still have a bad process at the end of the day. And so, we took the opportunity through this transformation to look at the way that we did things and ask the hard questions, like, why are we doing it? Why do we have certain teams, right? And really try to enhance our process and our workflows along the way.
It's so interesting because we've just seen so many times where people have moved existing processes to new technology, and it just creates almost more problems
Mm-hmm.
than revisiting and evolving those processes to meet kind of the current environment.
Mm-hmm.
And kudos for you guys for doing all that hard work.
Mm-hmm.
Listen, you've been in the independent channel for a lot of years, with your experience. It's really, as we look at kind of the IBD, the RIA, the insurance, all that space, man, the change is incredible. Even over the last 3 years, if you look at it, I think probably more than at any time in my career. What do you see Lincoln looking like in 5 years? All right. And, what are some of the things you're doing to really go in that direction?
Yeah, no, and the transformation that we started a couple of years ago was as much about fixing current risks and current processes as it was, putting us in a position to be um, relevant and stronger 5 years from now, right? And so all that work was really the foundation for what we're about to do and what we'll continue to do. Our CEO Ed Forrest always closes our town halls and large advisor uh, gatherings with this slide. It's kind of a road that's kind of going off into the horizon, and it's years, 2026, 2027, and across the top this year it was, we're in year 57 of our 100-year plan. And it made its appearance a few years ago when we turned 50. And he uses it I see it probably at least 6 times a year in presentations. It's a lot of things. I think, first and foremost, it's a commitment to independence, right? We're a family-owned firm. We're an independent firm. There's, to your point earlier, there's all of this activity in the marketplace with acquisitions and consolidations, and, it's a direct commentary on what's happening there. But it also helps with, a lot of the perception and the feedback that we're getting from our partners in the field, and recruiters from other firms when they see the changes that we're going through. And, we advisors got a ton of calls from recruiters saying, "Hey, Lincoln's doing all this work so they can get ready to sell." Um, I can tell you honestly, we wouldn't have done all that work and spent the money that we spent and reinvested in the business if we were going to turn around and sell. So, it's this commitment to independence to get us to, the next 5 years and the next 5 years. But, what we wanted to build was a platform that allowed us to be a firm that emphasized service over task execution, right? Like, we were very task oriented, the way that we ran the business. We've pivoted now with some of the outsourcing that we're doing to our clearing partner, and really trying to hone in and focus on how do we deliver service better? How do we meet the advisor where they need to be met?
Right.
How do we build a platform where advisors can spend more time growing their business and less time with, overly complex and, operational tasks, and like making it easier to do business is really kind of where we want to be in the next 5 years.
I love how you guys just, you just try to get a little better every day. Yes, you've taken on some big chunks and gotten better, but whenever I talk to your leadership team and yourself, you're always trying to, make incremental improvements, as you noted earlier.
Yeah. No, and I think one of the things we learned along the way is, like, it's that incremental progress. It helps to build credibility and trust, and from our partners out in the field. So wherever we can avoid doing some type of like big bang change, and certainly from a risk perspective, it reduces that. But again, building that credibility, showing that the commitment to execution and change and doing it the right way, day over day over day, it helps with build that credibility that we need as their partner.
That's great. All right, so I'm going to change. How about we change the trajectory a little bit? And I always love to ask this question: who are the people and companies that you actively follow, and what are they doing to change the narrative?
Outside of you mean?
Thank you.
I will say I'm not great at this. Like I do like scan industry news. I like browse social media, and I try to read a lot, and um, just to see what other firms like us are doing, where they're rolling out new products, how who like what new partners they're integrating with.
Right.
What I do try to do, and I've when I get an opportunity through industry groups like FSI, I was on their Ops and Tech Council for a few years. I've had the opportunity to sit in on Pershing's Wealth Advisory Board. I do try to build my network and connect with industry operators who built platforms at scale, who lived through integrations, who dealt with, regulatory change. And I try to connect with them, and then, go back to them and try to, help them help me, or, work with them over time. And so, made a lot of new friends over the last couple of years. And, I do call on them frequently to say, hey, we have this problem we're trying to solve. Have you ever, dealt with this or done this, or, what's your feedback?
Sure.
And so, try to do that whenever possible. I also, if I am looking out at other firms out there in our space, it's a lot of times I'm focusing on technology firms that are focused on workflow. And maybe this is like the ops nerd in me, but like that draws my attention. Like, and I find I spend a lot of time thinking about how do I connect dots differently in a way that's more efficient, and creates less risk and have more controls. And so, technology is at the core of that. And so, always interested in those firms that are coming out with new ways to support onboarding, or different things that are a challenge in our space. And I guess the last thing I do is I try to make the most of my relationship with our clearing partner, Pershing. And I'm sure that I'm a giant pain in the ass sometimes, but I don't view them as just they're our clearing partner, right? And, the decision to go with them a couple of years ago was as much about what they could do in that space, but also tapping into one of the oldest financial institutions in the country, right? A firm that has nearly 60 trillion in assets under custody, and the scope of services they provide outside of what a typical independent firm would require them is immense. And so, have been able to have conversations or meet people throughout the bank, and get information about new products and, new things coming to market, like this whole digital asset change that's happening out there. Was able to get a lot of great information from them. Changes in the ETF space, which I think is going to be massive, right? They're sitting at the center of a lot of that. And so it's great to have a partner that's, will open up their doors and make their resources available.
That's great. No, you packed a lot into that answer. All right. So one of the things we like to do is, and we're moving towards the end of our conversation here. But we always like to do the 1% better flash. And it's how we close the show, but we'll hand you the mic for 90 seconds and let you share a few things that you're thinking about. No script, none of that. So the mic's yours, Anthony.
And I thought about this for a while, and I find myself more and more recently, thinking and talking about people, within the firm. And so, and that's kind of a theme that we've talked about throughout this discussion is kind of people and culture. In wealth management, we focus a lot on strategy and technology and growth and product and regulations, and like all of that is really, really important, right? It's it's kind of what drives the financials of the business, but none of it really works. It doesn't come together without the right people and the right culture kind of holding it all together. It shows up in a number of different ways. It shows up with our advisors and how they support their clients and advocate for their clients. It shows up internally on how teams collaborate, and and how we overall as a firm put our clients, which is our advisors and their end clients, first. And the changes that we go through day in and day out really are a stress to culture sometimes. It's something that I've, again, over the last few months have really started to hone in on. I was at a conference recently where the keynote speaker was a guy named Jake Wood. If you don't know him, really just a really impressive human being. If you look up his story, and he said, culture is the way decisions are made in the absence of leadership, which is, I thought was really, really a great way to kind of define it.
Yeah, very interesting.
And so as leaders of organizations, like I said, it's important to think about strategy and technology. Like we have to spend as much time being thoughtful about the culture and the way that our leadership drives culture intentionally, to make sure that we're running our firms the right way, that we're building the teams that can deliver on the priorities and the goals that we set for them. So culture is huge.
It's interesting because as I spend more time in this industry, culture is so important, and you hit it right, the nail on the head there, Anthony. So thank you for that. That was terrific insight. All right, Anthony. Well, I want to thank you for being on our podcast. You've been a terrific guest, and love to hear what you said. So thank you for spending some time with us, and until next time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me again.
RJ, what a conversation with Anthony. I really enjoyed that. It went in a little different direction than I thought, but I loved where he went with it.
The theme of the conversation to me was the word change, because it sounded like he went through his business went through a lot of change. And the one point where he talked about how the tech change was easy, but the people change was difficult. And it brought me back to a situation I had with two radio stations where I was the manager. And the one we made change, the staff bought into it, and the station just took off. The second station I worked at, where I had to make some changes, they fought me tooth and nail, and it was just a tough situation. It was a veteran staff that I came into from the outside. And when he was talking about change, it just brought me back to that. And technical change is easy. People change, that's a challenge.
As a consultant who's done this for too many decades at this point, change is hard. And, three things that I really took out of the conversation, and his comments really impressed me with it. A firm can modernize without losing its culture. That's one. The other thing I heard in there was a big challenge is supporting, different types of clients and advisor needs. Well, basically just keeping those core processes simple and consistent. And then, hey, the third one that I have here, just like you said, change management is hard and actually matters more than the technology itself lots of times. And I loved how Anthony kind of rounded or packaged it all up, and with his long-term success really depends on people, culture, and steady improvement, which dovetails with our 1% Better podcast every day, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
All right, everyone. As we wrap this up, I always like to share one of my favorite quotes. Ted Lasso said it best: Be curious, not judgmental. Stay curious about the people around you, the firms doing things differently, and the work in front of you. That's how you get 1% better every day. This is Chip Kispert, signing off.
All right, Chip, thank you. And we need to add in a shout out as this podcast is brought to you by Beacon Strategies, LLC, the go-to resource for roundtables, consulting, and services that support wealth management firms and their providers. If you need some industry perspective or help, please visit beaconstrategiesllc.com. Again, thank you for listening to the Beacon 1% Better podcast. We ask you to share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review because this actually helps others find the podcast. Again, thank you for listening. And for Chip Kispert and everyone at Beacon Strategies, I'm RJ Malik, and we look forward to you joining us for our next podcast.